The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I turned off the main highway onto the narrow road leading to Providence. My GPS had lost signal 10 miles back, but the hand-drawn map I'd acquired from a gas station attendant was clear enough. Providence wasn't on most maps, and after spending 3 days trying to find information about it online, I understood why. The town was a ghost in the system. No tax records, no census data, no social media presence. Yet somehow, Providence had been mentioned in my grandfather's journal as the town that never suffers. For the past 6 months, I'd been investigating places with statistically impossible luck. No accidents, no crime, no illness. Providence kept appearing in whispers, always just out of reach. 5 more miles, I muttered, glancing at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Good. The road twisted through dense forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy in shifting patterns. My phone had been dead for hours, which was just as well. No signal meant no distractions from the story that had consumed my life since finding that journal. When the trees finally parted, Providence appeared like a mirage. Perfectly maintained houses lined pristine streets. Children played in yards while adults tended gardens. Everything was idyllic, almost unnaturally so. I parked near what appeared to be the town square and stepped out of my car. The air was clean, fresh, with a hint of wildflowers. No exhaust fumes, no industrial smells, just purity. "Can I help you?" a voice asked. I turned to find a woman in her late 50s approaching, her smile genuine but her eyes assessing. She wore a simple floral dress and carried a basket of vegetables. "Just passing through," I said, offering what I hoped was a disarming smile. "Thought I'd stretch my legs." "Visitors are rare," she replied, stopping a few feet away. "Most people don't know we're here. The road isn't well marked. We prefer it that way." She shifted her basket to her other arm. "I'm Martha. I run the general store." "Alex, nice to meet you." Her eyes narrowed slightly at my name, but the smile remained. "Well, Alex, if you need anything, just ask. We're a friendly bunch here." As she walked away, I noticed something odd. Everyone I could see had stopped what they were doing and was watching me. Not with hostility, but with a focused curiosity that made my skin prickle. I walked toward the general store, a brick building with a faded sign. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the woman, Martha, followed me inside. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked, placing her basket behind the counter. "Just information, really. I'm a journalist, researching small towns with unique traditions." The smile tightened. "Providence doesn't have traditions worth writing about." "That's funny," I said, pulling out my notebook. "I heard you have an annual festival, something called The Offering?" The store went silent. Martha's face became a mask. "Where did you hear that?" "Local folklore. Thought it might make an interesting piece." Martha moved around the counter, her movements suddenly fluid and predatory. "Some stories aren't meant to be told, Alex. Some places aren't meant to be found." I backed toward the door, my heart pounding. "I think I'll be leaving now." "I don't think so," she said, just as the bell chimed again and 3 men entered, blocking the exit. The tallest one stepped forward. "The council will want to meet you." "Is that necessary?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Very," he replied. "It's almost voting season, and we've been without an offering candidate for 2 years running. Unprecedented." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Martha smiled, and this time it was all teeth. "Every year Providence votes. One name goes into the box. One person disappears. It keeps us safe, prosperous. And you, Alex, you're not from here. You won't be missed." I lunged for the door, but the men were faster. Strong hands grabbed my arms, and something hard pressed against my skull. "Welcome to Providence," Martha said as darkness closed in. "You're gonna love our traditions." I woke up to the smell of damp earth and mildew. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache behind my eyes. The floor was cold, rough stone against my cheek. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting. I was in a basement. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Thick wooden bars formed a cell, and I was inside it. My phone, wallet, and notebook were gone. So was any hope of this being a misunderstanding. The heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and footsteps descended. An old man, thin and stooped, appeared. He wore a simple dark suit and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. His eyes were pale blue, and they seemed to look right through me. "Alex," he said, his voice a dry rustle. My name is Elias. I am the head of the town council. Let me go, I said, my voice hoarse. You can't just kidnap people. Elias smiled faintly, a sad, knowing expression. We can, and we do, for the good of the many. Providence is a sanctuary, a paradise, but paradise has a price. The offering, I spat, gripping the cold bars of my cell. You murder people. We don't murder, he corrected gently. We cull, one person a year, a sacrifice to ensure the continued prosperity of this town. It has worked for over a century. No crime, no sickness, no accidents. The world outside decays, but Providence endures. That's insane, I said, though a part of me, the part that had seen the impossible statistics, felt a chilling sliver of belief. You can't just play God. God abandoned this place long ago, Elias said, his voice flat. We learned to survive on our own. The ledger in the town hall proves it. Every name, every year, since the founding. A necessary record for a necessary tradition. My eyes darted past him to a small, sturdy-looking table against the far wall. On it sat a large, leather-bound book, the ledger. He had just shown me the key. People will come looking for me, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. I told people where I was going. Elias shook his head. No, you didn't. You're a careful man, Alex, a good journalist. We know. We've been watching you since you first started asking questions about lucky towns. You don't leave loose ends. The cold in my stomach turned to ice. They hadn't just stumbled upon me. They had lured me here. Why me? I asked. I'm not one of you. Your tradition is for residents. The vote is for a resident. Elias conceded. But sometimes a suitable candidate doesn't present themselves. The town's needs must be met. An outsider is a convenient solution. No family to mourn, no friends to ask questions. You are a ghost, Alex. You will simply cease to exist. He turned to leave. The vote is tomorrow at sundown. I suggest you make your peace. Your name is the only one on the ballot this year. He climbed the stairs, the heavy door groaning shut behind him. The bolt slid home with a deafening finality. I was alone in the flickering light, the silence pressing in. But I wasn't just a victim. I was an investigator, and my investigation had just led me to the primary source, the ledger. I looked around my cell. The bars were old but solid. The lock was heavy iron, but the hinges on the cell door, they were rusted. And on the floor, near the wall, was a loose stone, about the size of my fist. I had a tool, I had a target, and I had less than 24 hours. The stone was heavier than it looked, its edges worn smooth by time. I wrapped my hand in the sleeve of my jacket, a pathetic attempt to muffle the sound, and went to work on the lower hinge of the cell door. Thwack. The sound was a sharp crack in the dead silence of the basement. It was louder than I expected. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the single bulb overhead. Thwack, thwack. Rust flaked away like dried paint. The hinge groaned, a low metallic protest. I worked faster, my fear a fuel. Each strike was a countdown. The vote was at sundown. I didn't know how long I had, but I knew it wasn't long enough. Thwack, thwack, crack. A splinter of metal broke off. The hinge was weakening. I was making progress. I raised the stone for another blow when the heavy door at the top of the stairs creaked open. Panic seized me. I shoved the stone behind my back and pressed myself against the far wall of the cell, trying to control my breathing. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. It was Martha, carrying a wooden tray. On it sat a bowl of thin, grayish soup and a single slice of bread. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, her voice a syrupy poison. She stopped just outside the bars, her eyes scanning the cell, looking for any sign of trouble. "It's a long wait until sundown." "I'm not hungry," I said, my voice tight. She shrugged, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "Suit yourself. More for me." She slid the tray through a narrow opening at the base of the door. As she leaned forward, a thin silver chain slipped out from the collar of her dress. Dangling from it was a key. It wasn't a large, ornate key for a dungeon door. It was small, simple, and brass. A key that looked exactly like the kind that would unlock a small antique chest, or a ledger. My eyes locked onto it. Martha saw my gaze and quickly tucked the key back into her dress, her friendly mask dropping completely. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Don't get any ideas, journalist," she hissed. "That key never leaves my neck, and you never leave this cell." She turned and ascended the stairs, the heavy door slamming shut behind her. The bolt slid home with a terrifying thud, but she had made a mistake. She'd shown me her weakness, her pride. I waited a full 5 minutes, counting each second in my head. Then I went back to the hinge with a renewed, desperate energy. The image of that key burned in my mind, the ledger. It was my only proof, my only weapon. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The stone bit into the corroded metal. The hinge screamed. Crack! The final bolt holding the hinge tore free. The cell door sagged, swinging inward on its single remaining pivot with a high-pitched groan that scraped my nerves raw. I was out. I slipped through the gap, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air in the main part of the basement felt different, colder. I moved quickly to the table, my eyes fixed on the leather-bound ledger. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the worn cover, and then I heard it. From somewhere above, a single bell began to toll. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the stone floor. It wasn't a church bell. It was a summons. The vote was starting. The bell's final toll hung in the air like a death sentence. I had no time. I snatched the heavy ledger from the table, its leather cover cool against my sweating palms. It was thicker than I'd imagined, a century of secrets bound in one place. I scanned the basement. The stairs were the only way out. I took them two at a time, my bare feet silent on the cold wood. The door at the top was locked, of course. But the lock was old, a simple sliding bolt. I threw my shoulder against it. Thud, the wood groaned. I backed up and hit it again, harder this time. The bolt shrieked in its housing, and the door burst open into a narrow, dusty hallway. Muffled voices echoed from somewhere ahead. Deep, rhythmic chanting. The vote. I crept down the hall, the ledger clutched to my chest. The air grew warmer, thick with the smell of old paper and floor wax. I found myself behind a heavy velvet curtain. Peeking through a gap, I saw the source of the sound. I was in the back of the town hall's main chamber. The townspeople of Providence were gathered, their faces illuminated by candlelight. They stood in a circle, all of them, their eyes closed as they chanted in unison. In the center of the circle stood a simple wooden ballot box. At the head of the circle was Elias, his hands raised, and beside him was Martha, her hand resting protectively on the silver chain around her neck. There was no time to read the whole book. I needed a weapon. I flipped open the heavy cover, my fingers flying through the brittle, yellowed pages. The first entry was dated 1923, a name, Abigail Vance, then another for 1924. Thomas Croft, a list of the condemned, stretching back 100 years. But it was the very first page before the entries that caught my eye. It wasn't a list of names. It was a set of rules, written in a spidery, elegant script. The first rule was about the vote, the second about the secrecy. But the third was different. Rule 3, the covenant of Providence is absolute. Should the offering be interrupted or the tradition broken, the prosperity granted shall be instantly and irrevocably revoked. The safety of this town is a bubble, and a bubble, once popped, can never be reformed. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a tradition, it was a magical contract, and I was about to pop the bubble. I had two choices, run and hope they didn't catch me, or stand and fight. The journalist in me, the part of my grandfather that lived in me, made the choice. I burst through the curtain. Stop! The chanting died. Every head turned. 100 pairs of eyes, wide with shock and then fury, fixed on me. Elias's face was a thundercloud. Seize him, he roared. But I held up the ledger. The vote is invalid, I shouted, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. The rules are clear. An outsider cannot be an offering. The covenant is broken. Martha lunged for me, but I sidestepped, holding the book out like a shield. Rule 3, Elias, I yelled, my eyes locked on his. The covenant is absolute. You break it, you lose everything. A murmur went through the crowd. Fear, real, primal fear. He lies, Elias boomed, but his voice had lost its authority. He's trying to destroy us. I'm not the one who made a deal with the devil to keep my lawn green. I shot back. I flipped to the first page of entries, the one from 1923. This is Abigail Vance, isn't it? The founder's daughter. The first offering. You didn't start with a criminal or an outcast. You started with your own child. The crowd gasped. It was the one secret they had all buried, the one truth that made their paradise a living hell. Panic erupted. People started shouting, pointing at each other, at Elias. The perfect facade of Providence was shattering before my eyes. In the chaos, I saw my chance. I turned and ran for the main doors. Get him! Martha screamed, her voice lost in the din. I slammed my shoulder into the heavy oak doors, throwing them wide open. I stumbled out into the cool night air, the ledger still in my hands. Behind me, the town of Providence descended into madness. I didn't look back. I just ran. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. The sounds of shouting and panic from the town hall faded behind me, replaced by the frantic pounding of my own heart. The ledger was a dead weight in my arms, but I wouldn't let it go. It was my only salvation. My car. I just had to get to my car. I burst out of the town square and onto the main street and skidded to a halt. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. A porch swing, swaying gently just moments ago, snapped from its chains and crashed to the ground. A window in the house next to it shattered, spraying glass onto the perfect lawn. The street lights, which had cast a warm, inviting glow, began to flicker wildly, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. The covenant was breaking, right now. A scream tore through the night from a nearby house, then another. The idyllic facade of Providence was melting away, revealing the rot beneath. I kept moving, dodging between houses that were now groaning under an invisible strain. A fresh coat of paint on a pristine white fence began to peel and curl before my eyes, turning to dust. The manicured flower beds blackened, their vibrant colors draining away like water down a drain. I reached the spot where I had parked my car. It was still there, a lonely island of normalcy in a sea of chaos. I fumbled in my pockets, a cold dread washing over me. No keys. Of course, they had my wallet, my phone, my keys. They had taken everything. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at me. I could hear them coming, the mob. Their shouts were no longer just angry. They were terrified, a herd of cornered animals lashing out. I threw myself against the driver's side door, yanking on the handle. Locked. I peered through the window, the steering column. I had watched a dozen YouTube videos on how to hotwire a car for a story I never wrote. It was time to see if I'd been paying attention. I smashed my elbow against the window. It didn't budge. I looked around wildly and spotted a large rock in a decorative garden that was already turning to mush. I grabbed it and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered. The alarm system blared to life, a piercing shriek that cut through the night. It was a beacon, a dinner bell for the mob. "Over here!" I heard Martha shriek. I reached through the broken window, ignoring the shards of glass that bit into my arm, and popped the lock. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the plastic casing under the steering column. I ripped it off, exposing a mess of colorful wires, red to brown, yellow to red. I crossed the wires, praying to a god I didn't believe in. The engine sputtered, turned over, and roared to life, just as hands grabbed at my broken window. A face, twisted with rage and fear, pressed against the glass. It was one of the men from the general store. I slammed the car into reverse, stomping on the gas. The tires screamed as the car shot backward, sending the man sprawling. I spun the wheel, craning my neck to see behind me. The street was filled with people. They were pouring out of their homes, no longer a unified community, but a terrified, mindless mob. Martha and Elias stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces masks of disbelief and fury. Elias raised a hand, pointing at me, his mouth moving in a silent curse. I slammed the gear shift into drive and floored it. The car lurched forward, plowing through the crowd. People scattered, diving out of the way. I didn't look back to see if I'd hit anyone. I couldn't. The road out of town was a nightmare. The asphalt was cracking, great fissures opening up in the earth. Trees that had stood straight for a century were now toppling over, their roots torn from the ground as if by an invisible giant. The forest itself was trying to keep me here. I gripped the wheel, the car bouncing and swerving on the disintegrating road. In my rearview mirror, I saw one last glimpse of Providence. The town wasn't just decaying, it was being consumed. A thick, unnatural fog was rolling in from the surrounding forest, swallowing the houses, the church, the town square. The last thing I saw before it vanished was the faint, flickering light of the street lamp in front of the town hall. Before it, too, was extinguished forever. I drove on, into the darkness, leaving the town that voted to disappear itself. Miles turned into an hour. The only sound was the engine of my car and the ragged sound of my own breathing. The shaking in my hands had subsided, replaced by a deep, bone-numbing cold. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was just empty darkness. There was no sign of the fog, no sign of Providence. It was as if I had dreamed the whole thing. But the gashes on my arm, weeping blood onto the torn sleeve of my jacket, were real. And the heavy ledger on the passenger seat, its leather cover seeming to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy, was real. My phone was still dead. My wallet was gone. I was running on fumes and adrenaline. Up ahead, a flickering neon sign cut through the gloom. Marty's 24-hour gas and diner. It was an oasis of garish, normal light in a world that had just gone insane. I pulled into the gravel lot, the car's engine sputtering its protest. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. I sat there for a full minute, just breathing, trying to convince myself that I was safe. I grabbed the ledger and slid out of the car. The diner was mostly empty, just a truck driver hunched over a cup of coffee at the far end of the counter and a tired-looking kid wiping down a table. I walked to the restroom, my every muscle screaming. I locked the door and leaned against the sink, looking at my reflection in the mirror. A stranger stared back, pale, wide-eyed, with a smear of dirt on his cheek and a wild look in his eyes. I ran cold water over my arm, hissing as it cleaned the wounds. The cuts were shallow but numerous. A roadmap of my escape. Back in the main diner, I slid into a booth, tucking the ledger beside me. The waitress, a woman whose name tag read Brenda, ambled over. "Just coffee," I said. My voice was a rasp. "You got it, hon," she said, pouring a mug without comment. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, the heat seeping into my frozen fingers. I was safe. I was out. I had the proof. The story of a lifetime. A story no one would ever believe. A car pulled up outside. Its headlights swept across the diner, blinding me for a second. An old, dark sedan. The kind of car an undertaker would drive. My heart clenched. It was probably just another customer. I told myself to relax. The bell over the door chimed. I didn't look up. I just stared into my coffee, watching the ripples. 2 people slid into the booth across from me. I didn't need to look. I could feel them. The cold, predatory stillness, the scent of damp earth and old paper. "Hello, Alex," Elias said, his voice as dry and rustling as ever. I slowly lifted my head. He and Martha were sitting there, as calm and composed as if they were meeting me for a business appointment. They were immaculate, not a speck of dust on them, no sign that they had just escaped a town being swallowed by the earth. "You're—" I started, but the words wouldn't come. "Persistent," Martha finished, a thin, cruel smile on her lips. "We made a promise to Providence to protect it. Your little tantrum didn't destroy it. It just set it free, and us with it." Elias placed his hands on the table. They were pale, the knuckles prominent. "The ledger, Alex, you have something that belongs to us." "It belongs to the world," I said, my hand tightening on the book under the table. "It belongs to the covenant," he corrected. "It is the source, and it will not be used to tarnish our memory." The truck driver at the counter paid his bill and walked out, giving us a wide berth. It was just me, them, and the tired-looking kid in the kitchen. We were alone. "You can't have it," I said, my voice finding its strength again. Martha laughed, a short, sharp sound. "We don't have to take it from you here." She glanced at the kid in the kitchen. "We have all the time in the world now, and we know where you're going." Elias slid out of the booth. "We'll be seeing you again soon, Alex, one way or another." They walked out, the bell chiming their departure. I watched them get in their sedan and drive away, their taillights disappearing into the night. I was left with the cold coffee, the throbbing in my arm, and a terrifying new realization. I hadn't escaped the story. I had just become the main character in its next and much more dangerous chapter. I didn't wait. I threw a crumpled $20 bill on the table and bolted from the booth, the legs scraping against the linoleum. Brenda, the waitress, shouted something behind me, but her voice was a distant buzz. I had to get out. I had to move. I fumbled with the car door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, caught, and settled into a rough idle. I slammed the car into drive, my foot hovering over the accelerator. The police. I needed to find the police. But what would I tell them? A town that doesn't exist, run by ageless cultists who made a deal with a magical ledger? They'd lock me up. My headlights cut a path through the darkness. I could just drive. Keep going until I hit a major city, disappear into the crowd. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they would find me. Elias and Martha were not just people anymore. They were something else. As I reached the edge of the gravel lot, ready to merge onto the empty highway, every light in the diner went out at once. The neon sign sputtered, buzzed, and died. The world plunged into a deeper, more profound darkness, and my engine died. The car rolled to a silent stop. I turned the key. Nothing. Just a series of impotent clicking sounds. They were here. I looked up. Through the cracked windshield, I saw them. They weren't walking. They were gliding across the asphalt, their feet not quite touching the ground. They moved as if they were part of the night itself, their forms shimmering and indistinct. The air around them seemed to warp, to bend. Panic gave way to a cold, clear resolve. I couldn't run. I had to fight. I grabbed the ledger from the passenger seat and pushed open the car door. "The covenant is broken," I yelled, my voice echoing in the dead silence. "Your town is gone. You have no power here." Elias stopped a few feet away, a look of profound pity on his withered face. "You misunderstand, Alex," he said, his voice now a chorus of whispers. "The town was just the vessel. The covenant is the power. And now, we are the covenant." Martha smiled, and her teeth seemed too long, too sharp in the gloom. "We are eternal, and we want our book back." The temperature plummeted. Frost bloomed on the windshield of my car, creeping like a living thing. The ground at my feet began to groan, tiny fissures spiderwebbing across the asphalt, a miniature echo of Providence's destruction. They were going to tear me and the world around me apart. I clutched the ledger to my chest. It was the source, the anchor. If they were the heart, it was the blood that pumped through their veins, and I was going to stop the bleeding. I turned and sprinted for the diner, my feet slipping on the frost-covered ground. I slammed my shoulder against the door, which was now unlocked. I stumbled into the pitch-black kitchen, crashing into a stainless steel counter. My hands frantically searched the darkness, finding a row of switches. I flicked them on. The kitchen was bathed in the harsh, sterile glow of fluorescent lights. In the back, an old industrial-sized stove stood against the far wall. Its oven door was slightly ajar, a faint glow from the pilot light visible within. It was a furnace, an incinerator. Behind me, the kitchen doors swung open with a deafening crash. Elias and Martha stood there, their bodies now almost translucent, their faces contorted in masks of rage. "You cannot destroy it!" Elias shrieked, his voice like tearing metal. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the stove, wrenched open the heavy oven door, and threw the ledger inside. I slammed the door shut and turned the gas knob to full. A low whoosh filled the room as the gas ignited. The oven glowed a furious orange. Elias and Martha screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of 1,000 souls being torn from their bodies. They clutched at their chests, their shimmering forms flickering violently. Through the small glass window of the oven door, I saw the leather cover of the ledger blacken and curl. The pages, filled with 100 years of damned names, caught fire and began to burn. As the book turned to ash, the impossible happened. Elias and Martha began to age. Decades passed in seconds. Their skin wrinkled and sagged, their hair turned to brittle white and fell from their skulls in clumps. Their bodies withered, their clothes hanging loose on frames that were rapidly turning to dust. They collapsed, not as bodies, but as two small piles of ancient dust and decaying fabric on the linoleum floor. The roaring in my ears stopped. The frost on the windows receded. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the gentle hiss of the gas stove. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The evidence was gone. The story was unprovable. I was just a man in a diner in the middle of nowhere. I walked outside. The first hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky a soft, bruised purple. My car was still dead, but I was alive. I was free. I started walking toward the rising sun, with nothing but the memory of the town that voted to disappear, and the chilling knowledge that some stories are better left untold.